All right, we're ready to add more to this table, but let's first go to File and Open, and let's go ahead and open up this Stephen King's house picture that I took when I kind of creeped on him up in Maine. I was on a road trip a while back through New England, and I found where he lived, and I took pictures of his house. He has this whole bunch of creepy wrought iron gargoyles and bats and different thing on his fence. If you're not sure who he is, he's an author. You may have heard or seen the movie It. Yeah, it's that guy. Okay, so what we're going to do is instead of using the magic wand, I want to show you a different technique using the quick selection tool. So it's in the same area. I'm going to come over here, and instead of magic wand, I'm going to choose quick selection. What this is going to allow me to do is I'm going to be able to go in and I'm going to be able to paint with what I want to keep. Now, this is a brush, which means you can change the size of the brush by coming over here. You can see how big that is. The problem with that is if I grab a big brush and I click, see where the marching ants are? This is the dots that are around here. It selected a huge amount of the photo. In fact, the entire photo. So I'm going to press Control D and deselect. What I'd like to do is I'd like to reduce the size, but I really don't like continually coming up here to the left corner to change the size. Here's a keyboard shortcut. What I'm going to do is I'm on the keyboard, there's a bracket key. It's the square brackets. It's near the Enter key. If you press the left bracket, it makes the brush smaller. Press the right bracket, it makes the brush bigger. Really good designers and ones who get fast at these programs have one hand on the keyboard and one hand on the mouse as they work, so that you can more quickly go through it. So I'm going to throw a lot of keyboard shortcuts at you, but keep in mind, you can always use the option bar up here. It just takes a little more time. If you forget what the keyboard shortcuts are, just ask. I know a ton of them and I'll help you with it. So Control plus zooms in, Control minus zooms out, and Control 0 brings the photo back to full screen. So plus, Control minus, Control 0. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to start to paint, and that's a little too much, so I'm going to make the brush even smaller. I don't know why that's grabbing so much of that, but that's okay. What we're going to do now is right up here, there is the plus sign. That's adding to the selection. If I press on the minus, this will let me subtract. Now, you want to be careful with that. You don't want to paint too fast because the program's trying to figure out what you want. It's looking for edges. So like I mentioned before, it doesn't see these as wings. It just sees them as pixels in a certain order. So I'm going to choose the minus, and I'm just going to click once, kind of here towards the middle, and I'm slowly chipping away at it. That was pretty good. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, but you'll notice right up here on the bat's head, I missed this area. So I'm going to change it back to the plus sign, and I'm going to use just the top portion of the circle. So this brush, just going to use that and just tap slightly. If I go too high up, notice what just happened. It grabbed all of that area. So I'm going to press Control Z to undo. Going to zoom back in. So I just want to be careful with the perimeter or the outside edge of the brush and just tap. Too much. Going to try it again. Too much. Control Z. And make my brush a little smaller. Wow, it really is. Now it's not letting me do it. Depending on the size of the photo, it'll do that sometimes. So I'm going to show you another way to clean that up. I'm going to grab the lasso. And with the lasso, if I hold down the shift key, I can draw along that edge and loop back around, and it'll grab it. If I end up grabbing too much, the shift key adds. The Alt or Option key, if you're on a Mac, will subtract. So I can trace the part I want to get rid of. Practice with that a little bit. That is a technique I love to use, and it'll make things go a little bit faster. All right, speaking of faster, let me go ahead and try this. You might have to go back a few times to manipulate this. I'm just going to try to go through it relatively quick. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key to subtract, subtract, subtract. And now I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. The beautiful thing with these kinds of programs is it doesn't have to be perfect if you're using these masks. If you were to erase and you accidentally messed up, you'd have to start over. when you're using masks, you can go back and make changes. So what I'm doing is I'm just slowly cutting this thing out a little bit just by using the edge of my brush. And if I go too far in, remember you press Alt to subtract, Shift to add. Now I'm using the space bar to move things around. I want to get rid of this middle portion. So I'm going to use the brush and I want to subtract this part out. So I'm going to press the minus. That did pretty good, but I'm noticing I missed this white edge here and I missed this area right here on its tail. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Shift key to add. So Alt is subtract, Shift is add. Oh, did too much. So I'm going to do Control Z. So this is the thing, is the program is going to try to automatically figure out what I want, but that just messed everything up. So I'm going to Control Z again, and I'm going to use the lasso this time. I keep switching to the lasso because it gives me a little more control. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to basically trace along this area and loop that over, and it added that. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, going to drag along the outside and kind of come inside. This inside part doesn't matter because it's already selected. So that grabbed that piece. You might need some help with that. So when you get to it, definitely let me know and I'll try to help you with it. It does take a little bit of technique and practice to get it that clean, but that's kind of the direction you're heading. Once you've got it set, this is the key part. You spent the time cleaning this up, so now mask it. Now you notice this time, instead of grabbing the outside and having to reverse it, since I painted with what I wanted, it already did that. I didn't have to do Control I to invert it. Now I'm going to take that. I'm going to move it over here to the wood table and drop it. There's my little bat on the table. I would go ahead and if you're still working on this, if it's not the end of class, then you can continue working with it open. But if you want to come back to this to work on it, I'd recommend save it as a PSD file. Just remember where you saved it. In the next video, we'll do another technique.